We wanted to talk a little bit about the worldwide cloud security implications from the largest geopolitical incident going on right now, which is the situation in Ukraine. That situation, of course, became a crisis when Russia launched a full-scale invasion into the country on February 24th. We've got this animation from Wikipedia of the progress of the invasion so far, but there are a lot of important reasons to pay attention to this conflict. It's a humanitarian refugee crisis. There's uncertainty about ways that aggressive economic sanctions might affect the global economy. It's contributed to a spike in oil prices. It has the possibility of metastasizing into a larger European war or even sparking a global conflict. And then anytime the United States and Russia are facing off in any way, there's a possibility that nuclear weapons could be used. But for this discussion, we're focusing on a relatively narrow question that's particularly important for those of us involved in securing IT networks and cloud infrastructure. And that question is, what kind of cyber weapons are being used, and what, if anything, can we do to try to prevent them from spilling over into our businesses? So there's no one better to talk about those questions than Ian Thornton-Trump, a CISO at threat intelligence security company Cyjax, and a regular speaker at international IT security conferences. Additionally, he's just had an article published in the peer-reviewed EDPAC's journal called Russia, the Cyber Global Protagonist. Ian, thanks for joining us.
I'm just absolutely delighted to be here.
Well, Ian, IT professionals have been tracking the Russia-Ukraine conflict pretty warily since 2013 because of that cyber weapons spillover issue. And I wonder if you could talk briefly about just some of the worst examples already of cyber weapons spilling out and causing global problems from this conflict, in the last, 10 years or so.
Yeah, that's a really good, accurate assessment. So that, obviously we had NotPetya, which grabbed headlines from originally launched via using what is believed to be NSA malware that was then weaponized by Russia. A supply chain attack where a accounting server where you download software from contained that malware as well. It has been described as one of the most impactful cyber attacks that we've ever seen. From there, we go into a really interesting scenario where Russian forces work directly with cyber assets, and we've seen this in other attacks. Especially against the national critical infrastructure of the Ukraine, turning the power out, destabilizing the Ukrainian networks, and of course, controlling the information that the Ukrainian government would like you to receive, and making sure that that became inaccessible. This is all textbook Russian playbook going back to their invasion of Georgia.
So that's a pretty hair-raising history that you've gone through there. Since this became a hot war on February 24th, what have we seen in terms of new cyber weapon deployments, that are reaching outside Ukrainian borders?
Yeah, it's been interesting because it's been somewhat constrained. We didn't see the giant global cyber attack, which I think many vendors wanted us to see. However, every single agency issued a warning that I think because we saw, the kinetic war happening, the links between, geopolitics and cyber are well known. So I think the fear was justified, and the messages of shore up your defenses really were well heard. Which is remarkable in itself. Now, from the cyber attack side, we certainly saw Russian wiper malware deployed. However, what was interesting is because Ukraine had been, I think, very close to the EU and access to Western cyber defense capabilities, these strains of malware, whether or not it was Russian or Belarus, is still an argument that's being had in the community, got picked up by Sentinel-1 and Microsoft really fast. Like, we're talking about hours before protection was put into the field from detection, which is amazing. Now, there are still all sorts of simple attacks that are happening right now, like denial of service attacks globally, both on the USSR. The activist group Anonymous has been actively engaging in both Belarus and Russia with cyber attacks of their own. This is all part of what a lot of people are calling the information war that is going on, because it's not just about malware that could come through the pipe at us. It is about disinformation and all of the fear and uncertainty and doubt that goes along with essentially what is a complete war zone.
And what about on the ransomware side? I understand there's been some mixed effects there. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, certainly there was a group that sort of seemed to vault into this with the idea that they were out to make some money. Lapis is what there's called. They breached NVIDIA. They breached Samsung. And it's interesting because they don't appear to have an affiliated state actor and are sort of conducting themselves like cowboys and focusing on the demanding all sorts of outrageous demands from NVIDIA, including asking them to turn all of their intellectual property into open source, and attributing that request because essentially NVIDIA announced that in their next series of GTX video cards, they would be degrading the capabilities of those video cards for Bitcoin mining. So obviously, this doesn't seem to be a motivation normally attributed to a state actor in terms of how they conduct themselves in the course of a cyber attack. To be fair, I think Russia right now is looking at their home front. That's causing a great deal of problems. So initially, when you had the invasion start, I don't think Russia was expecting the level of backlash in both sanctions and cyber attacks from activist groups and from the Ukrainians themselves. Like the defense that's going on in the ground, the Ukraine is certainly hitting back on the cyber level as well.
Is there anything that you think that IT security pros should be watching out for over the next few weeks as this conflict develops?
Absolutely. As the conflict, and let's be fair right now, I think we're in, the early opening stages of the second act of a 3-act play. So, one of the cautious things is, prepare for everything, but hope for nothing. Yeah. And I think, that's a reality. Make backups that are then offline, that, are stored in a safe location. We're almost back to the days of taking your backup tapes home at night. But getting that level of safety and assurance to look at your resiliency and your backup recovery, add a new domain controller, let it synchronize, shut it down, wait a couple of days, bring up that domain controller again, let it synchronize, so that you have the best chance if you get, what people fear, which is another wormable type of attack that rapidly infects globally. I don't think that because of all the rhetoric that NATO has put out talking about Article 5 being invoked for a significant cyber attack, and they've deliberately left what significant means vague. I don't think that the Russians would be foolhardy, but this really depends on whether or not the Russians feel that they need a major breakthrough in order to get to the table of negotiations. And unfortunately, the current conflict is showing what Russia does best is, as soon as they run into any sort of spirited resistance, they roll back and they use their artillery to turn it into rubble. This is very similar to what we saw in Chechnya, very similar to what we saw in Syria, and especially the city of Homs.
The other thing that I wanted to ask is there anything that IT pros can do right now to protect their organizations as best they can?
Definitely adopt that multi-factor authentication to protect your IDAM, your identity and access management. That's absolutely critical. That's something that should be being done, even prior to the conflict. We always talk about what are the best practices. I think what we're seeing is pay attention to CISA and what the exploited vulnerabilities are that they publish. I think it's almost being published on a weekly basis now, of those detected exploited abilities. vulnerabilities and be, aware that if you're seeing those exploited vulnerabilities, being made aware of them and they are present within your infrastructure, that is absolutely a great way to become intelligence driven in terms of your vulnerability management. I know many IT shops need to know what they need to focus on right now, because I think focus is one of the most difficult things, especially with all the noise and the rhetoric and the constant CNN bumpers of the war in Ukraine. And so really focus on your job, be available to people, understand that everybody's going to be stressed about it as well. So now's not the time to, be a jerk.
So it really sounds like do all the things you should be doing, just make sure that you're doing them, and maybe, accelerate your cycle a little bit, cycling through.
Yeah, and I think there's some huge work to be done at a much more rapid pace. I think there is a call to action here, especially when it comes to your attack surface management, using access control lists, being very careful about what traffic you're letting in from certain countries that are known to be the protagonist nations. There's nothing to say that Russia won't call in favors with some other regimes that they back that have significant cyber capability. By sort of outsourcing their global thuggish behavior, which gives them, a bunch of attribution capabilities that, we're not exactly sure where the attack's coming from, but, the attack seems to be synchronized with a Russian military operation. And this is sort of where we're at right now this is the buildup to another Russian attempt at seizing the capital of the Ukraine. We've been talking about the convoy for a couple of days now. They're taking losses, sitting statically, but they're essentially preparing for the big assault.
Well, Ian, this has been informative, sobering, sometimes hopeful, sometimes scary, but appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective on what's going on.
Thank you so much.